The chocolate walnut cake weighed heavy in my arms as I pushed through the restaurant doors, its rich aroma mixing with the scent of expensive perfume and fresh flowers. 6 hours I'd spent perfecting it. The same recipe I'd been making for Benjamin's birthday since he turned 7. The year he tumbled from our old maple tree and broke his wrist. Even after the divorce, even after everything fell apart, some traditions felt too sacred to abandon. "Mom, you made it." Benjamin's voice carried across the elegant dining room, though his smile seemed more practiced than genuine. At 32, my eldest still possessed his father's charm, warm on the surface, calculating underneath. I surveyed the scene before me, pristine white tablecloths, crystal stemware catching the soft lighting, place cards written in gold calligraphy that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I'd contributed half the cost of this celebration, money scraped together from my modest teacher's pension, money that should have gone toward fixing the leak in my bathroom ceiling. But what did that matter when it came to my son's happiness? "Where should I put this?" I asked, trying to keep the nervousness from my voice as I gestured toward the cake. A young server approached with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll take that to the kitchen for you, ma'am. Your table is right this way." I followed her past the main dining area, where family members were already gathering, past my 3 sons and their wives, past Graham, my ex-husband, and his wife Celeste, past even Benjamin's golden retriever sporting a ridiculous party hat. We walked and walked until we reached a small corner table decorated with colorful balloons and surrounded by children's toys. The kids' table. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The server checked her notepad. "Mrs. Adelaide Morrison, this is your assigned seat." I stood frozen, still clutching my purse, watching from across the room as my family settled into their places at the main table. There was an empty chair next to Benjamin, a place of honor with a name card reading Celeste. His stepmother of 15 years, the woman who had somehow earned the right to sit beside him while I was relegated to supervising toddlers. Benjamin noticed my hesitation and walked over, that familiar half-smile playing on his lips. "Everything okay, Mom?" "I thought I'd be sitting with the family," I managed to say. He gently took my purse and set it on the children's table. "We figured you'd be more comfortable back here with the little ones. You know how they can get without proper supervision." His tone was casual, dismissive, as if seating his mother with the kindergartners was the most natural thing in the world. I glanced again at the main table, at that empty chair beside him. "But I'm your mother, sweetheart. Of course you are." His smile never wavered. "And you've always been so good with children. It's perfect. Really, you're exactly where you belong." The casual cruelty of those words hit me like a physical blow. 30 years of midnight fever watches, of working double shifts to pay college tuition, of being the voice on the other end of the phone during every heartbreak and triumph, reduced to background supervision at my own son's birthday party. "Whatever makes your day special," I heard myself say, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. The evening unfolded like a play where I'd forgotten all my lines. From my corner table, I watched Graham stand to propose a toast to the son any father would be proud of. I watched Celeste straighten Benjamin's tie with the practiced affection of a woman who'd never earned the right to such intimacy. My other sons, Wesley and Nathan, acknowledged me with nothing more than polite nods, as if I were a distant acquaintance rather than the woman who'd raised them. 30 years of being an afterthought. Birthdays, graduations, weddings, always with the same explanation. "Mom understands. Mom doesn't mind. Mom is reasonable. Each time I'd swallowed my hurt and smiled, grateful just to be included in their lives at all. But something shifted in me that night. Maybe it was watching 5-year-old Ruby, Benjamin's daughter, ask me to tell her stories about her daddy when he was little, stories I realized she'd never heard before. Maybe it was seeing Graham place his hand over Celeste's, his wrist adorned with the same watch I'd saved 6 months to buy him for our 10th anniversary. Or perhaps it was simply that at 58, I'd grown bone-weary of being reasonable. The laughter from the main table seemed to mock my isolation. These people, my family, had reduced me to a convenient babysitter, someone to manage the mess while they enjoyed the celebration. I thought about all the birthday cakes I'd baked over the years, all the careful planning and heartfelt gifts, all the ways I'd tried to show my love only to be pushed further and further to the margins. I excused myself from the children's table, telling little Ruby I'd be right back. In the parking lot, I sat in my aging Honda and stared at the restaurant's glowing windows. Through the glass, I could see my family toasting and laughing, completely unaware of my absence. How long would it take them to notice I was gone? 10 minutes, 20. Would they notice at all? In my trunk was a polished mahogany box I'd brought on impulse, uncertain until this moment whether I would actually give it to Benjamin. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. Inside were documents I'd kept hidden for over 3 decades, papers that would change everything they thought they knew about themselves, about me, about the story we'd all been living. When I returned to the restaurant, they were preparing to cut my cake. I walked slowly to the main table, the mahogany box feeling heavier with each step. The children's table seemed very far away now. "What's that, Mom?" Benjamin asked when I placed the box beside his plate, his birthday cheer faltering slightly. "Just something I've been saving for the right moment," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Open it." He lifted the lid cautiously, and I watched his expression change as he saw what lay inside. Adoption certificates for each of my 3 boys, yellowed photographs from St. Mary's Children's Home, correspondence from the adoption agency, documents that would shatter the narrative they'd been fed their entire lives. "I don't understand," Benjamin whispered, his hands shaking as he lifted the first certificate. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath as others leaned in to see what had captured his attention so completely. This was my moment, the moment I'd been unconsciously building toward for 30 years, the moment when I would finally tell the truth about who we really were and who we'd been pretending to be. But as I looked at my 3 sons' faces, seeing confusion and the first flickers of something that might have been fear, I realized that opening this box meant there would be no going back. The comfortable lies we'd all been living with were about to crumble, and in their place would be a truth that might destroy us all or set us free. "You were 9 months old when you came to us," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected it to be. "Your brothers followed, each about a year apart. The agency said it was unusual to approve 3 adoptions so quickly, but Graham and I were determined to build our family." The silence that followed was deafening. Benjamin's hands trembled as he set down the adoption certificate, his face drained of color. "We're adopted." Wesley stood from his chair, moving closer to peer at the documents. All of us. Graham had gone pale, his arm rigid around Celeste's shoulders. I could see the wheels turning in his mind, calculating damage control, searching for the right words to maintain his carefully constructed narrative. "Yes," I continued, feeling a strange calm settle over me. Your father wanted biological children desperately, but I couldn't conceive. When I insisted on adoption, it became a point of contention. That was putting it mildly. The fights had been vicious, Graham's voice echoing through our small apartment. Why can't you just be normal? Adelaide, why do we have to take in someone else's mistakes? But I'd held firm, driven by a maternal instinct I couldn't explain. The restaurant seemed to fade around us as understanding began to dawn on their faces. The narrative they'd been fed their entire lives, that I was difficult, unreasonable, that their father had no choice but to find happiness elsewhere, was starting to crack like old paint. There's more, I said, gesturing toward the box. Benjamin pulled out legal documents, his eyes widening as he scanned the pages. This is property documentation, Westfield County. I nodded. My grandmother's farm, 500 acres that's been in the Morrison family for 4 generations. I recently learned that a resort developer wants to build there. They've offered $17 million. The transformation was swift and unmistakable. Shock melted into calculation so quickly it confirmed my worst fears about who my sons had become. I watched their expressions shift, saw the same greedy glint that used to appear in Graham's eyes whenever money was discussed. I came tonight planning to tell you that I was dividing it equally among you boys. I continued, carefully taking the papers back from Benjamin's suddenly gentle hands. But seeing how I was treated tonight, well, it's given me clarity about a lot of things. I tucked the documents into my purse, feeling the weight of 30 years of accumulated hurt and disappointment. For 3 decades, I've lived in the margins of my own life, measuring my worth by what I could give rather than what I received. I convinced myself that sacrifice was love. My voice grew stronger with each word. Not anymore. Mom, Benjamin began, his voice softer than I'd heard in years. We had no idea about the adoption, about Dad leaving because I chose you. I finished for him, and I'd make that choice again 1,000 times over. But the money, that's a different choice entirely. I stood to leave, ignoring the chorus of voices suddenly calling my name. After decades of invisibility, it was remarkable how quickly they could see me now. At the doorway, I paused. The question burning in everyone's mind hung in the air, unasked but palpable. What would I do with the money now? The truth is, I said, turning back to face them one last time, I'm not entirely sure what I'll do, but for the first time in 30 years, I'll decide based solely on what I want. That part of my life, living for others who don't value my presence, is over. And as I walked out into the cool evening air, one thought burned brighter than all others. Freedom had never tasted so sweet, or come with such a hefty price tag. My phone started ringing before I even reached my car. Benjamin, Wesley, Nathan, even Graham, suddenly. Everyone needed to speak with me urgently. I silenced each call, my hand steady on the steering wheel as streetlights blurred past through tears I refused to shed. When I pulled into the driveway of my modest rental home, the small 1-bedroom house looked different somehow. For 15 years, I'd apologized for its size whenever my sons visited. It's just me, I'd say. I don't need much space. As if my solitude were something shameful, tonight, its humble walls offered sanctuary. Inside, I kicked off my heels and poured myself a glass of wine. Not the cheap brand I usually bought, but the expensive Merlot I'd been saving for a special occasion. If reclaiming my life wasn't special enough, what was I sat at my small kitchen table and spread out the property documents? Grandmother Morrison's farm had been in our family for 4 generations. When she passed 10 years ago, she'd left it to me, her only granddaughter. The land had been leased to local farmers for decades, generating just enough income to cover property taxes and basic maintenance. Until 3 months ago, when Pinnacle Resort Development discovered that the property's rolling hills offered spectacular views of Lake Harmony. Created by the new dam project, $17 million. The number still felt surreal, like something from someone else's life. My first instinct had been to divide it among my sons, their inheritance, security for their futures, college funds for my grandchildren. I'd even drafted a letter explaining how the money would be distributed, planning to include it with Benjamin's birthday gift. Now that letter lay crumpled in my purse, replaced by a question I'd never allowed myself to ask, "What do I want?" The doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Benjamin standing on my porch, still in his birthday clothes, his tie loosened and his hair disheveled. Behind him, Wesley and Nathan waited by their cars, their faces grim in the porch light. I considered pretending I wasn't home, but they'd seen my car in the driveway. With a deep breath, I opened the door. "Mom!" Benjamin's voice was conciliatory, his eyes red-rimmed. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside to let him in, noticing how he scanned my small living room with new interest, as if searching for other hidden treasures. "Your brothers are outside. Should I invite them in too?" He nodded, and soon all 3 of my sons were perched awkwardly on my second-hand furniture, looking like strangers in a place they'd visited countless times before. "You left so suddenly," Nathan began. At 29, my youngest had always been the peacemaker. "We were worried." "Were you," I asked quietly, "or were you worried about what would happen to the money?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "Mom, that's not fair," Wesley said, leaning forward. "You dropped a bombshell tonight. We're adopted. Dad left because of us. And now there's this inheritance we never knew about. Your father left because he couldn't accept that our family wouldn't share his DNA," I corrected. "And he's managed to convince all of you over the years that I was the unreasonable one." Benjamin cleared his throat. "Dad said you became impossible to live with after we came, that you became obsessed with being the perfect mother and didn't care about being a wife anymore." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Is that what he told you? That I loved you too much?" "He said you pushed him away," Nathan added quietly. "What I did," I said carefully, "was refuse to apologize for choosing you 3 when he demanded I choose between my children and my marriage. But that's ancient history now." Wesley stood and walked to the window, his reflection troubled in the glass. "Why didn't you ever tell us we were adopted?" The question hung heavy in the air. The truth was complicated, a mixture of fear, love, and Graham's insistence, even after the divorce, that the boys didn't need to know. "At first, we planned to tell you when you were older," I said. "Then your father left, and I was struggling just to keep our lives together. As time passed, it seemed less and less important. You were my sons. Biology didn't matter." "But it mattered to Dad," Benjamin said. I nodded. "It mattered to him very much." The room fell silent again. In that moment, I saw 3 grown men grappling with a shifted reality. The father they'd idolized suddenly cast in a different light. "About the land," Nathan finally said, his voice careful. "$17 million is life-changing money." And there it was, the real reason for their late-night visit. "Yes, it is," I agreed. "Life-changing for me." Benjamin's head snapped up. What does that mean? It means I'm 58 years old, and I've spent 2/3 of my life putting everyone else first. I worked 2 jobs to put you all through college. I never remarried because dating took time away from being available whenever you needed me. I've lived in this tiny rental because most of my savings went to helping with down payments on your houses, wedding costs, even tonight's restaurant bill. I took a breath, surprising myself with my calm. I don't regret any of it. But tonight, when I saw that I didn't even merit a seat at my own son's birthday table, I realized something important. Sacrifice without recognition eventually becomes erasure. "Mom, about the seating," Benjamin began. I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. For 30 years, I've lived as if my only value was what I could give to others. That ends tonight." "So you're punishing us because of a seating chart." Wesley's voice held an edge I recognized, his father's indignation when denied something he expected. "No," I said firmly. "I'm choosing myself for the first time since you boys came into my life. The money is mine, and I'm going to use it to build the life I've put on hold for decades." "All of it?" Nathan asked, shock evident in his voice. "I haven't decided yet," I said honestly. "But my decision won't be driven by guilt or obligation." Benjamin stood, his face hardening into an expression I'd seen on Graham's face countless times. "This isn't like you, Mom. You've always put family first." "That's exactly my point," I replied. "You've never known the real me, the woman who exists beyond motherhood. Neither have I, for that matter." They left an hour later, their departing hugs stiff with unresolved tension. As their cars disappeared down the street, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I hadn't seen in years. "Adelaide, it's Graham. We need to talk about what happened tonight. There are things you don't understand." I stared at the message, feeling that familiar pull, the instinct to smooth things over, to make peace, to retreat into the background where I'd always been most comfortable. Instead, I typed back, "I understand perfectly, for the first time in 30 years. And then I blocked his number. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in decades. When I woke the next morning, sunlight streamed through my bedroom window with an intensity I hadn't noticed in years. Everything felt different, brighter, more vivid, as if I'd been living behind a gauze curtain that had finally been pulled away. I made coffee and carried it to my small balcony, where a cardinal perched on the feeder I'd hung last spring. I'd spent so long being invisible that I'd forgotten how it felt to truly be seen. Now, with $17 million within my grasp, and decades of deferred dreams waiting to be fulfilled, I faced a question both terrifying and exhilarating. Who would I become when I finally stepped out of my own shadow, before I could contemplate the answer fully? My doorbell rang. When I opened it, I found myself face to face with someone I never expected to see on my doorstep. Someone whose presence threatened everything about my newfound resolve. Celeste. Her name fell from my lips like a stone dropping into still water. My ex-husband's wife stood before me, immaculately dressed even at 9 a.m, not a strand of her honey blonde hair out of place. The woman who had replaced me in Graham's life, and somehow in my son's hearts too. "Adelaide," she said with a tight smile that didn't reach her carefully made-up eyes. "May I come in?" Every instinct told me to shut the door, but curiosity won out. In 15 years, Celeste had never once visited my home. We'd exchanged pleasantries at family gatherings, maintained the civil facade that divorced families require, but this was unprecedented. I stepped aside, watching as she surveyed my modest living room with the same calculating gaze I'd seen in my son's eyes the night before. She was looking for something, signs of hidden wealth, perhaps, or clues about my intentions. Coffee, I offered, more from habit than hospitality. No, thank you. This won't take long. She perched on the edge of my sofa, designer handbag clutched in her lap like a shield. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I'd spent 15 years imagining this woman as a villain, the homewrecker, the replacement mother, the reason my marriage had fallen apart. Now, sitting across from her in my small living room, I saw something unexpected in her perfectly composed facade nervousness. Graham told me about last night, she finally said, about the adoption revelation, about the land. Did he also tell you why he really left? I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. She looked down at her perfectly manicured hands. He said you two wanted different things, that you became obsessed with the boys. That's one way of putting it. I settled back in my chair, studying her face. He wanted biological children. I couldn't have them. When I chose adoption, he chose to leave. Celeste's eyes widened slightly. That's not. He said you became impossible to live with, that you pushed him away. I gave a hollow laugh. Is that the story you've been telling my sons all these years? No wonder they think I belong at the children's table. She had the grace to look embarrassed, a flush creeping up her slender neck. Adelaide, I didn't come here to argue about the past. I came because the boys are devastated. They've been up all night trying to make sense of everything. And Graham sent you to smooth things over, to convince me to share my inheritance. He doesn't know I'm here, she said quietly. That surprised me. In the few interactions we'd had over the years, Celeste had always deferred to Graham, echoing his opinions, backing his decisions. The woman sitting before me now seemed different somehow, less certain, more genuine. Then why are you here? She took a deep breath, and for the first time since I'd known her, her composure cracked slightly. Because I know what it's like to live in someone else's shadow. I stared at her, unsure how to respond. This wasn't the conversation I'd expected. You think you're the only one who's disappeared, she continued, her voice growing stronger. You've been the saint all these years, the selfless mother who sacrificed everything for her boys. Do you know what that makes me the villain? The stepmother who could never measure up. You took my place, I said, the old hurt rising in my chest. I filled a vacancy Graham created, she corrected, her blue eyes flashing with something that looked like pain. And I've spent 15 years trying to be what everyone needed. The perfect wife, the supportive stepmother. Do you know what the boys call me behind my back, Dad's trophy wife? As if I have no value beyond how I look on Graham's arm. For the first time, I really looked at Celeste, not as my replacement, but as a woman. I saw the careful makeup that couldn't quite hide the lines of fatigue around her eyes, the perfect posture that spoke of constant vigilance, the way she held herself as if perpetually on display. I recognized the signs because I'd carried them too, the weight of always being measured against an impossible standard. What does Graham think about the land? I asked. Her laugh was surprisingly bitter. What do you think? He says it should go to the boys, that it's their birthright. When I pointed out that they're not even biologically related to your family, he said it doesn't matter. They're Morrisons by name, and the land is Morrison land. I shook my head. Of course Graham would say that. He'd always believed he was entitled to things that didn't belong to him. My inheritance, my son's loyalty, even my silence about his failures as a father. Something flickered in Celeste's eyes, recognition, perhaps, or resignation. The boys are going to fight you on this, she said. Especially Benjamin. He's already talking about challenging the property rights, claiming you're not mentally competent to make financial decisions. The betrayal stung, even though it shouldn't have surprised me. My own son would declare me incompetent for money. He's his father's son, I said simply. We sat in silence for a moment, two women united by the men who had shaped and, in many ways, diminished our lives. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. She stood, smoothing her expensive skirt with hands that trembled slightly. Maybe I'm tired of watching women disappear, or maybe... She paused, meeting my eyes for the first time with genuine emotion. Maybe I need to know it's possible to start over. As she reached the door, she turned back. "Whatever you decide to do with the money, Adelaide, make it count." After she left, I sat motionless in my living room, replaying our conversation. In 15 years of imagining confrontations with Celeste, I'd never once considered that we might have anything in common. We were both women who had been reduced to supporting roles in our own lives, valued only for what we could provide to others. My phone buzzed with a text from Benjamin. "Dad says we need to talk as a family. Dinner at our house tonight, 7 p.m. The presumption in those words, that I would simply appear when summoned, that family included Graham, but positioned me as an outsider, ignited something in me. For decades, I'd been diminished by the very people I'd sacrificed everything for. Not anymore. I texted back, "I have plans tonight. I'll be in touch when I'm ready to discuss next steps." Then I opened my laptop and did something I'd been putting off for years. I started writing, not the children's book I'd always dreamed of publishing, but a letter, 3 letters, actually, one to my attorney, one to my financial advisor, and most importantly, one to myself. By noon, I had a plan. First, I called Marcus Chen, an attorney I'd consulted briefly during my divorce. Unlike the lawyer Graham had pressured me to use, Marcus had a reputation for being ruthlessly effective and fiercely protective of his clients' interests. "Adelaide Morrison," he said when he answered. "It's been, 15 years? Too long." I agreed. "Marcus, I need your help with something complicated." 2 hours later, I left his office with a clarity I hadn't felt in decades. The property would be sold, but on my terms. A portion of the proceeds, $3 million, would be placed in an irrevocable trust for my grandchildren's education. The money would be managed by independent trustees, ensuring that neither my sons nor their fathers could access it until the children reached college age. The rest would fund my second act. The life I'd put on hold for 30 years. I would travel, maybe buy a small house by the ocean, perhaps even start that nonprofit I dreamed about, a foundation helping women rebuild their lives after divorce or domestic abuse. For the first time since my sons were placed in my arms, I allowed myself to dream of a life that centered on my own happiness. That evening, as I packed an overnight bag, my phone exploded with messages. My decision to skip the family meeting had apparently caused an uproar. Graham's messages grew increasingly demanding, filled with veiled threats about legal action and concerns for my mental state. The boys alternated between guilt trips and thinly veiled warnings about challenging my decisions in court. I silenced my phone and placed it in a drawer. Whatever storm they were brewing could wait. Tonight belonged to me. The drive to the coast took 3 hours through winding country roads, lined with autumn maples. I'd booked a room at the Sunset Harbor Inn, a small bed and breakfast overlooking the Atlantic, Nothing extravagant, but a step up from my usual budget accommodations. As I checked in, the elderly proprietress handed me a room key and a complimentary glass of champagne. Celebrating something special, she asked with a warm smile. I looked out at the ocean stretching endlessly before me, vast and unknowable, like the future I was finally claiming, a new beginning. In my room, I opened the French doors to the sound of waves crashing against the rocky shore below. The salt air filled my lungs as I stepped onto the small balcony, watching seagulls dance on the evening breeze. This was what freedom felt like, the ability to choose where to be, what to do, without consulting anyone else's needs or expectations. I thought about Celeste's words. Maybe I need to know it's possible to start over. Perhaps we were more alike than either of us had realized. Two women who had spent decades as supporting characters in other people's stories, finally ready to write our own. My newfound peace lasted exactly 2 hours and 17 minutes. Then a knock at my door shattered the tranquility I'd been savoring. When I opened it, I found myself facing not just one unexpected visitor, but three. My sons stood shoulder to shoulder on the narrow porch, their expressions cold and determined in a way that turned my blood to ice. "We need to talk, Mom," Benjamin said, pushing past me into the room without invitation. Now, behind him, Wesley closed the door with an ominous click that seemed to echo through the small space. The cozy bed and breakfast room suddenly felt claustrophobic. My three sons, men I'd raised with every ounce of love I possessed, now loomed before me like strangers with hostile intent. Benjamin paced near the French doors, his silhouette dark against the ocean view. Nathan stood awkwardly by the bathroom door, unable to meet my eyes. Wesley positioned himself between me and the exit, his stance unmistakably threatening. "How did you find me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. "Find my phone," Benjamin said flatly, holding up his device. "You never turned off the family sharing after you helped Nathan set it up last Christmas." Of course. In my rush toward independence, I'd forgotten about the digital tether still binding us together. Technology that had once been about keeping family connected now felt like surveillance. "What's this about?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "We saw Marcus Chen today," Wesley said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "He's got a reputation for being ruthless in divorce cases, taking wives for everything they can get. He's an attorney," I replied carefully. "I needed legal advice." Benjamin stopped pacing to face me, his expression harder than I'd ever seen it. "Legal advice on how to cut your own sons out of their inheritance, on how to deny your grandchildren their birthright." There it was, the entitlement Graham had cultivated in them for years, the belief that what was mine automatically belonged to them, that my role was to give and theirs was to receive. "I'm not cutting anyone out," I said, moving slowly toward the small chair by the window. "I'm establishing an education fund for my grandchildren. The rest is mine to use as I see fit. $3 million in a trust that we can't access until the kids are 18, Nathan interjected, his voice cracking with emotion, "while you keep $14 million for yourself. How is that fair, Mom?" I looked at my youngest son, the one I'd thought might understand. The hurt in his eyes was genuine, but so was the greed. Graham had poisoned them all, teaching them that love was measured in dollars and that their mother's worth was tied to her willingness to sacrifice. "Fair," I repeated, feeling anger rise in my chest like a tide. "Was it fair when you all let your father convince you I was the villain in our divorce? Was it fair when you scheduled family vacations without inviting me? Was it fair when you put me at the children's table at your own brother's birthday party?" "That's ancient history," Mom, Benjamin said dismissively, waving his hand as if 30 years of pain could be brushed away. This is about now, about our family's future. No, I said, standing to face them. This is about the fact that all three of you see me as nothing more than a resource to be used, a wallet, a babysitter, a convenient background character in your lives. Wesley stepped closer, his jaw clenched. That's not true. We love you. Do you? I challenged, my voice growing stronger. When was the last time any of you called me just to talk? Came over for dinner without needing a favor? Remembered my birthday without a reminder from your wives? The silence that followed was damning. 3 grown men, caught in their own selfishness, unable to deny the truth of my words. We've all been busy, Nathan offered weakly. But even he couldn't put conviction behind the excuse. Too busy to treat your mother like a person worthy of respect, I said, shaking my head. Too busy to see me as anything other than an ATM with unconditional love. Benjamin's face hardened into an expression I'd seen countless times on Graham's face, the cold calculation of a man denied something he felt entitled to. If this is about the seating arrangement at my birthday party, you're being ridiculous. It's about 30 years of being treated as an afterthought. I snapped, the words exploding from me with decades of suppressed pain. The seating was just the final straw, the moment I realized that to you, I'm invisible unless you need something. So you're punishing us, Wesley said, his voice taking on his father's edge. Taking away our inheritance because of hurt feelings. I'm not punishing anyone, I replied firmly. I'm making a choice. For the first time in my adult life, I'm putting myself first. If that feels like punishment to you, perhaps you should examine why you believe you're entitled to something that was never promised to you. The room crackled with tension. I could see them exchanging glances, communicating in that wordless way they'd developed as children. But these weren't my little boys anymore. These were Graham's sons, shaped by his values, carrying his sense of entitlement like a birthright. Benjamin moved toward the door, then turned back with a cold smile that chilled me to the bone. Dad warned us this might happen. He said you've always been emotional, making decisions based on feelings, rather than what's right for the family. The familiar words, Graham's words, filtered through 30 years of manipulation, sparked something dangerous in me, not anger, but a crystalline clarity that cut through every excuse I'd ever made for their behavior. Your father, I said quietly, my voice steady as steel, has spent decades convincing you that I'm the unreasonable one. Did he also tell you that when the adoption agency called about you, Benjamin, he wanted to say no, that he argued we should keep trying for real children instead? Benjamin's face went pale, but I wasn't finished. Or that when Wesley came along a year later, Graham didn't even come to the adoption ceremony because he was too busy with work. Or that by the time we adopted Nathan, your father was already seeing Celeste behind my back. You're lying, Wesley said, but his voice lacked conviction. Check the dates on those adoption papers, I said, pulling the documents from my purse. Then ask your father when he started dating Celeste. I think you'll find the timeline very illuminating. The room fell silent as my words sank in. For the first time, I saw doubt creep into their expressions, doubt about the narrative they'd accepted for so long, about the father they'd idolized and the mother they'd dismissed. I have never lied to you, boys, I continued, my voice softening with the weight of truth. I've protected you, even when it meant protecting you from uncomfortable truths about your father. But I won't protect you from the truth about yourselves anymore. I moved to the French doors, looking out at the moonlight dancing on the waves. You've become men who would threaten your own mother over money, who would track her down when she needed space, who would put property rights above relationships. Is that really who you want to be? We're not threatening you, Nathan protested, but his words sounded hollow in the tension-filled room. Really? I turned back to face them. Then why are you here, blocking my exit? Why are you talking about challenging my mental competency in court? Why did you hunt me down like fugitives when all I wanted was one peaceful night away? None of them answered. The silence stretched between us, filled with 30 years of accumulated disappointment and betrayal. I want you to leave, I said firmly. I'll be in touch when I've made my final decisions about the property. But until then, I need space to think without pressure or manipulation. Benjamin's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with the same cold fury I'd seen in Graham during our worst fights. If you do this, if you keep the money for yourself, you'll lose us. Is that what you want, to end up alone? The threat hung in the air between us, as sharp and cutting as he'd intended. For decades, my greatest fear had been losing my children's love. Graham had wielded that fear like a weapon during our divorce, knowing it would keep me compliant, accepting less than I deserved, grateful for whatever scraps of affection they threw my way. But something had changed in me. Maybe it was Celeste's unexpected visit, her revelation that we were both women who had disappeared into other people's expectations. Maybe it was the taste of freedom I'd experienced in those 2 precious hours of solitude. Or maybe I'd simply reached the point where the threat of being alone held less terror than the reality of being invisible. I've been alone for years, I said, meeting Benjamin's gaze without flinching. The difference now is that I'm choosing it rather than having it forced upon me. Something shifted in Benjamin's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or the first glimmer of respect he'd shown me in decades. He'd expected me to crumble, to apologize, to beg for their forgiveness, like I always had before. We should go, Nathan said quietly, his voice thick with emotions I couldn't read. Give Mom some time to think. Benjamin hesitated, studying my face as if seeing me for the first time. The son who had once crawled into my lap after nightmares, who had cried in my arms when his first girlfriend broke his heart, who had called me every day during his first week of college because he was homesick. Fine, he said finally. But don't expect us to just accept this. We're not going to let you throw away our family's legacy because you're having some kind of midlife crisis. This isn't a crisis, I replied calmly. This is clarity. One by one, they filed out, leaving behind a silence that felt more like relief than emptiness. When the door closed, I sank onto the bed, my hands shaking with the aftershock of confrontation. But I wasn't trembling from fear. I was trembling from the exhilaration of finally standing my ground. For the first time in decades, I'd spoken my truth without softening it to protect their feelings. I'd chosen myself over their expectations. I'd refused to be diminished by the very people I'd given my life to raise. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It's Celeste. Graham knows the boys went to see you. He's furious. Be careful. The warning sent a chill through me. Graham had always been charming in public, calculating in private. When crossed, his vengeance could be subtle but devastating. I'd seen him destroy business rivals with whisper campaigns and strategic rumors. What would he do to a woman who dared to defy him? I texted back, "Thank you for the warning." Her response came immediately. "I'm starting to understand why you're doing this. Maybe it's time I found my voice too." I stared at those words, wondering what they meant for Celeste and for me. Could 2 women who had spent years as unwitting rivals become allies in reclaiming their lives, Before I could contemplate this further, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus Chen, and his voice was tense when I answered. Adelaide, we have a problem. Someone's been making inquiries about your mental competency with your doctor. They're trying to build a case that you're emotionally unstable and unfit to manage your assets. My hand tightened around the phone. Graham, most likely, moving faster than I'd anticipated. But Adelaide, Marcus continued, there's something else. I've been digging into your adoption records like you asked, and there's an irregularity I think you should know about. Something that changes everything. What kind of irregularity? His hesitation was palpable through the phone. The kind that changes everything we thought we knew about your marriage, your divorce, and why Graham really left. I think you should come back to town immediately. This isn't a conversation we should have over the phone. As I hung up, a mixture of dread and determination washed over me. Whatever Graham was planning, whatever secrets still lurked in my past, I would face them head on. No more hiding, no more apologizing for claiming what was rightfully mine. I packed my bag and checked out of the inn. My peaceful getaway cut short by the machinations of a man who couldn't stand losing control. But as I drove back toward town through the darkness, the moon lighting my way like a beacon, I wasn't afraid. I was ready for the truth, whatever it might be. Marcus Chen's office felt too small for the magnitude of what he was about to tell me. The morning sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across his mahogany desk, where a manila folder lay open like Pandora's box. His expression was grave as I settled into the leather chair across from him. When I started reviewing your adoption records, he began, his voice careful and measured, I noticed something unusual. The timeline didn't match what you told me about Graham's reluctance. I frowned, confusion washing over me. What do you mean? He slid a document toward me. Christopher's original adoption certificate, yellowed with age. You said Graham was reluctant about the adoptions, especially Benjamin's, that he fought you every step of the way. He did, I said firmly. He argued against it right up until we brought Benjamin home. He wanted biological children, not someone else's cast-offs. That's what he called them. Marcus pointed to a signature at the bottom of the page, and my world tilted sideways. This is dated 3 weeks before the adoption was finalized. It's a consent form signed by Graham, not just agreeing to the adoption, but actively advocating for it. He requested expedited processing. I stared at the familiar signature, my mind reeling. That's impossible. Graham fought me on every step of the adoption process. He made me feel guilty for wanting children we couldn't have naturally. There's more. Marcus pulled out another document, this one bearing the letterhead of Sacred Heart Adoption Services. This indicates that Graham was the one who initiated contact with the agency, not you. He's listed as the primary applicant. Your signature appears later in the process. The room seemed to spin around me. 30 years of memories began to shift and realign like pieces of a puzzle I'd never seen clearly. Graham's voice echoed in my thoughts. You're the one who wanted this. Adelaide, you chose these children over our marriage. There's something else, Marcus continued gently, pulling out a third document. Medical records from before your first adoption. They show fertility treatments paid for by Graham's health insurance, but also, he paused, his expression sympathetic. They show that the treatments were successful. You became pregnant. The air left my lungs in a rush. That's not possible. I never. But even as I spoke, a memory surfaced from the depths of my mind, hazy and dreamlike. A hospital room, machines beeping, pain, emotional and physical pain, so intense I thought I might die from it. Graham's face, tight with an emotion I couldn't name at the time but now recognized as guilt. According to these records, Marcus said carefully, you miscarried in your second trimester. The trauma was severe. You required surgery and spent nearly 2 weeks in the hospital. I shook my head, pressing my palms against my temples. I don't remember any of this. How is that possible? The medical notes mention post-traumatic amnesia. Sometimes when an experience is too traumatic to process, the mind protects itself by blocking the memory. And it appears Graham encouraged that forgetting. He lied to me, I whispered, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. For 30 years, he let me believe I couldn't have children. The record suggests something more complex, Marcus said, his voice gentle but clinical. After the miscarriage, you suffered from severe depression. When you started discussing adoption as a way to heal, Graham seemed to believe it was the only path forward, but he apparently decided it would be better if you believed adoption was entirely your idea, something you fought for, rather than something born from shared trauma. I felt like I was drowning in revelations. So he let me believe I couldn't have children, that he resented me for choosing adoption, that he left because I wasn't enough. It appears so, Marcus confirmed. And when he left, he continued the narrative that you had pushed him away with your obsession over the adoptions. He made you the villain in his story, and eventually in your son's stories too. A cold clarity descended over me, cutting through the confusion and hurt. He used my love for my children against me. He made me the enemy so he could be the victim. There's one more thing. Marcus hesitated, his expression pained. The medical records indicate that after the miscarriage, complications meant you wouldn't be able to conceive again. Graham knew this, but he let you believe you were still trying for years. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not for Graham. Not anymore. Every fight we'd had about trying harder, every month I'd hoped and had been disappointed, every time he'd made me feel like a failure, it had all been built on lies. Does this change anything about the land legally? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Marcus shook his head. The property is still legally yours to do with as you wish, but I thought you should know the truth before making any final decisions about your son's inheritance. I thanked him and left his office with the documents heavy in my bag. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had changed, though everything had. People walked past on the sidewalk, going about their ordinary lives, while mine lay in ruins and was being rebuilt simultaneously. I drove aimlessly through town, fragments of suppressed memories flickering at the edges of my consciousness. A positive pregnancy test. Graham's face glowing with joy as he spun me around our tiny apartment. Then darkness, pain, and a loss so devastating that my mind had simply erased it to survive. Eventually, I found myself parked outside Graham's house, the sprawling suburban colonial where he lived with Celeste, where my sons had spent weekends after the divorce, where the narrative of my failure as a wife had been written and reinforced for decades. I don't know how long I sat there before his silver BMW pulled into the driveway. He emerged wearing golf clothes, his hair grayer than I remembered, but his posture still radiating the confidence of a man who believed he controlled his world. When he spotted my car, he froze momentarily, then walked over. I rolled down my window, my heart pounding but my resolve steady. Adelaide, he said, his voice carrying that familiar note of condescension mixed with false concern. The boys told me about your emotional state. I think we should talk. Yes, I agreed, my voice calm. We should. Inside his house, I perched on the edge of an armchair while Graham poured himself a scotch. The living room was exactly what I'd expected. Expensive furniture arranged for show rather than comfort. Everything in muted tones that spoke of professional decorating rather than personal choice. Celeste was nowhere to be seen. "Where's your wife?" I asked. A flash of irritation crossed his face. "Visiting her sister. We had a disagreement." CT. I wondered if that disagreement had anything to do with the warning text she'd sent me. Had Celeste finally started asking questions about the stories Graham told? "I understand you've been making inquiries with my doctor," I said without preamble. Trying to have me declared incompetent. He didn't bother denying it, which told me everything I needed to know about his respect for me. "I'm concerned about your mental state, Adelaide. These rash decisions about the inheritance, this sudden vendetta against your own family. It's not like you." "No," I agreed, pulling the medical records from my bag and placing them on the coffee table between us. "It's not like the Adelaide you created, the woman who believed she wasn't enough, who thought she had to earn love through sacrifice, who accepted blame for things that were never her fault." Graham's face drained of color as he saw the documents. For a moment, the mask slipped, and I saw raw panic in his eyes. "I remember now," I said quietly. "Not everything, but enough. The baby we lost. The lies you've cultivated for 30 years. I was trying to protect you, he said. But the words rang hollow even to him. "You were protecting yourself," I corrected. "You couldn't handle my grief, so you redirected it. You made me believe adoption was my crusade instead of our shared healing. Then you punished me for embracing the very life you helped create." His expression hardened, the charming mask falling away completely. "You have no idea what I went through, watching you fall apart, trying to hold everything together while you wallowed in depression. And you have no idea what it's like to be unmade by someone you trust," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "To be told a story about yourself so convincingly that you believe it's true. To spend decades apologizing for choices you didn't even make." We sat in silence. 30 years of unspoken truths hanging between us like a toxic cloud. The man I'd once loved, once trusted with my heart and my future, had systematically dismantled my sense of self and fed the pieces to our children. "The boys deserve their inheritance," he finally said, falling back on the argument he thought would work. "Whatever happened between us, they're innocent." I stood, gathering the documents that proved his deception. "Our sons are many things, Graham, but innocent isn't one of them. They're the men you raised them to be, entitled, manipulative, and willing to threaten their own mother for money. So you'll punish them for my sins?" "No," I said firmly. "I'll teach them what you never did, that love isn't transactional, that women aren't resources to be depleted, and that consequences aren't the same as punishment." As I turned to leave, he called after me with the same threat Benjamin had made. "If you do this, you'll lose them forever. Is that what you want, to be alone?" I paused at the door, my hand on the brass handle. I was alone even when surrounded by all of you. At least now it's a solitude I've chosen. Outside, the autumn air felt clean and purifying, washing away 30 years of accumulated lies. I drove to the small cafe where I'd arranged to meet my sons, my mind clear and my purpose crystallized. They were already there when I arrived, 3 men with Graham's eyes and my stubborn chin, wearing expressions that shifted from defiance to uncertainty as I sat down. I've made my decision about the inheritance. I began without preamble, my voice calm and resolute. The familiar dance of manipulation and guilt wouldn't work anymore. I knew the truth now. About Graham, about myself, about the lies that had shaped our family for decades. And armed with that truth, I was finally ready to reclaim not just my inheritance, but my life. The land will be sold, I announced, watching their faces carefully. $3 million will go into irrevocable trusts for your children's education, managed by independent trustees, not by you. The remaining $14 million will establish the Morrison Foundation for Women's Renewal, helping women rebuild their lives after divorce or domestic abuse. The silence was deafening. Benjamin's face cycled through shock, anger, and calculation before settling on cold fury. You can't be serious. I'll be running the foundation myself, I continued calmly. Each of you will have the opportunity to sit on the board and be part of something meaningful, something larger than your own self-interest. But first, you'll need to earn back my trust. I placed the folder of medical records and adoption documents on the table. Inside is the truth about your adoptions, about your father's role in them, and about the lies he's told for 30 years. Read it, understand it, then decide who you want to be. Men like your father, or men worthy of the sacrifice it took to make you my sons. Wesley reached for the folder with trembling hands. Mom, we never meant... I know, I said, standing to leave. But intentions don't erase impact. I spent 30 years being invisible in my own family. That ends now. When you're ready to see me as a person deserving of respect rather than a resource to be used, call me. Until then, I have a life to build. As I walked toward the door, Nathan called out, his voice breaking. What if we don't want to be either of those things? What if we just want to be ourselves? For the first time in days, I smiled genuinely. That, sweetheart, would be the greatest outcome I could hope for. Outside, the autumn air felt crisp with possibility. At 58, I was finally beginning the life I'd deferred for 3 decades. There would be challenges ahead, legal battles, family estrangement, the loneliness of starting over. But there would also be mornings when I woke up and asked myself what I wanted to do, not what others needed from me. The Morrison Foundation would help other women find their voices, their strength, their worth beyond sacrifice. And perhaps, in time, my sons would find their way back to me, not as dependents seeking resources, but as grown men capable of genuine love and respect. Freedom, I discovered, tasted exactly like hope. Dear friends, Adelaide's story isn't just about inheritance or family drama. It's about one of life's most profound truths. We teach people how to treat us by what we accept. For 30 years, Adelaide accepted crumbs when she deserved a feast. She accepted silence when she deserved celebration. She accepted being invisible when she deserved to be seen and valued. And by accepting these things, she unknowingly taught her family that this treatment was acceptable. But here's the beautiful part of her story. It's never too late to change the lesson. At 58, Adelaide finally said enough. She stopped accepting less than she deserved. She stopped making herself smaller to make others comfortable. She chose her own worth over their expectations. If you're reading this and thinking about someone in your life who takes you for granted, ask yourself, what am I teaching them about how to treat me? What am I accepting that I shouldn't? What would happen if I valued myself as much as I value others? Adelaide's courage reminds us that self-respect isn't selfish, it's essential. That setting boundaries isn't mean, it's necessary. That choosing yourself isn't abandonment, it's awakening. Your worth isn't determined by how much you sacrifice. Your value isn't measured by what you give up. You matter simply because you exist. Did Adelaide's story touch your heart? Share in the comments below. What lesson did this teach you about your own relationships? Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? If this story moved you, please subscribe and ring that notification bell. Your support helps us share more powerful stories that remind us all of our worth and strength. Remember, you are not too old. It's not too late. And you are absolutely worthy of respect, love, and happiness. The life you want is waiting for you to claim it.